I wanted to get into some of the players and some of the storylines entering this Masters. I mean, it's interesting that we're not seeing a lot of them square off head to head entering the Masters.
Pretty fragmented and disjointed top of the world right now in golf.
Yeah. So I kind of wanted to put you on the spot and make you rank Scotty, Rahm, Rory, and Brooks. Who do you think best chances if you had to order them or pick one or two that your life depended on them being in the top 5? Those top 4 names, where are you right now?
I think it's hard to not take Scotty number 1. And I know the putter's an issue, but you know that the ball striking is going to be there. So I think I'd probably go Rahm and Scotty 1 and 2. And I think Brooks and Rory present somewhat variable wild cards. We saw Brooks play great early in the majors. Then he wasn't really much of a factor the last 2 majors. We saw Rory play really, really well at LACC. When Rory seemingly plays poorly now, it's still a top 10. Last year's Masters, that was the only one that he hasn't finished in the top 10 in the last 8, right? It's a great question. I think what would be awesome is if all 4 of those guys were playing on the same tour, and we got to look at all of them in a similar environment. But right now we get Rahm and Brooks, who I think have both played pretty well at the start of this year. They haven't won, but both of them played well on LIV. And then you get Rory and Scotty. Rory's played on 2 different tours, dominated on the DP World Tour, and headed over to the U.S. Tour. Hasn't been the same. I wonder, if part of it's just everything that's going on off the course with the U.S. Tour. If being on the DP World Tour offered like, wow, this was a chill week where nobody's asking me all these questions. But Scotty, I don't know. How would you go?
Maybe this is an overcorrection to last year, but I feel pretty strongly that Rahm should be the favorite. And they're all kind of, those top 3 are kind of co-favorites with Brooks a little behind them. I think the accuracy with his driver is a big thing, and kind of going back to what we've talked about earlier in this pod with big misses being penalized. Like Rory out there, how far he hits it, and he can get a little stray. A lot of tee shots make me nervous, where I don't have that concern with Jon Rahm, who just hits it appreciably straighter. And with Scotty, how bad the short putting is. I know it's not the most important spot to putt lights out, but every hole can turn into a bogey for Scotty pretty quickly, whereas Jon Rahm just doesn't have those holes in his game. So I think Jon Rahm should be the favorite this year, even though who knows what his game's going to look like entering. I think we saw last year that a lot of the LIV guys were fine. So I think Jon Rahm should be the favorite. Andy,
I have a question for you. Do you think Rory should throttle back? We saw at LACC a similar, I think there's some similarities there.
I love this.
We saw like a distinct difference in his game plan. He hit irons, which he still hits really far. He hit a lot of 3-woods. Do you think a 3-wood's easier to turn over right to left? Do you think that Rory should be thinking about maybe hitting less drivers, knowing that he's plenty long, with throttling back?
I love this. I'm glad you asked it. That's something that I've felt. Yes, he should. And I know that runs antithetical to what gets discussed a lot in the golf analytics circles. Always hit driver. Augusta is different in how it penalizes wide misses, where it's a lot different than somewhere like Torrey Pines. So I don't think Rory should just plod his way around with 3-wood, but there are opportunities where I think he should. The first hole is a good example of that. And we've seen him hit some spray drivers. The final round 2018 with Patrick Reed, where Rory starts the day by just flaring one way out right into the trees on 1. I think 1 is a 3-wood. I think 10 for sure is a 3-wood that you can turn over right to left. So there's some opportunities out there where I think he should be throttling back.
Yeah, I don't think it's a crazy idea. Like he's one of my big takeaways last year from the majors is it's astonishing how much further he hits the ball, or farther. It'd be farther, forgiving. Farther he hits the ball than people we consider very long. If the golf course is like firm and rolling, he was, at LA, he was regularly 25 past Scheffler. I mean, that's insanity. And he can give up some of that for preferred shape. And I know that statistically, a lot of times, like in a bulk sample, when you look at every player, dispersion patterns of a 3-wood and a driver aren't that much different.
They are different, though.
They are different.
They are different.
That much different. I think this is at the top level of the game. We need to look at like personal dispersion patterns, not bulk. And I'd be really curious to see what Rory's dispersion with the 3-wood is versus a driver. And if it keeps one ball out of like the trees, out of the pine straw, that really plays into his hands. That's the big number that we just talked about with the golf course.
Yep. And look, some of what gets discussed is bulk, but people do look at that kind of thing. I can tell you for a fact, Rory's dispersion is appreciably tighter with the 3-wood, which makes sense. Most golfers are, not just because the ball is traveling farther offline. Also, that you do hit it straighter from like this perspective of the dispersion angle with the 3-wood. So I'd like to see,
because of the loft, right? I mean, loft.
Yeah, you just have more control over the ball in general. I mean, I'm sure some of that
shorter club.
If Rory's, I'm sure he has certain swings with driver that tighten the dispersion, so you could get into some of that. But in general, I agree with you. He needs to be thinking about where those big misses could come into play and consider hitting a 3-wood there, especially if it doesn't have changed the approach difficulty that much. Like that's a big thing, I think, generally at Augusta. Like if 20 yards is worth a different amount on different holes, right? On 15, an extra 20 yards is a huge deal, but on the first hole, it's not as big
I wouldn't
of a deal.
say hit 3-wood there.
Exactly. Andy, wanted to ask you this. So golfers since 2010, I was looking at some numbers. Since 2010, golfers who have played at least 12 rounds, top strokes gained by round in the field, Rahm, Scheffler, Rory, and Brooks are all in the top 6. Can you name the other 2? Strokes gained by round since 2010.
Again.
Sorry?
Say that again.
Golfers who have played at least 12 rounds since 2010 at the Masters, top strokes gained by round. Rahm is 2, Scheffler's 3, Rory's 5, and Brooks is 6. Can you guess 1 and 4?
1 and 4 by round. Jordan Spieth.
Jordan Spieth, number 1, and then he's very close to Rahm and close
Justin
to
Rose.
Scheffler. Those 3 all pretty close. Sorry?
Justin Rose, number 4. So I think that's interesting. You get the top 3 there, Spieth, Rahm, and Scheffler, all around 2.2, 2.3 strokes around. Then a pretty big half a shot gap to Rose at 1.7, 1.8, and then Rory and Brooks at 5 and 6. So I think the Spieth conversation and your just a guy take, this is an interesting use case this year for what Spieth's going to have. He's number 1. I mean, you talk about a place that fits his game really well. Like if he could just keep the ball in the corridors from there on, from the basically the tee shot on, you couldn't design a better golf course for Jordan Spieth.
I think similar with like somebody like Cam Smith, right? I think it's kind of reasonable to lump those 2 golfers together.
That is actually a really good comp. Those are 2 players that play a very similar style. I think Cam. I'm excited. I want to see Cam. One of the things that I wish we had was like ShotLink similar data across the 2 tours. Has Cam lost some speed? It seems like he's not in the same shape that he was in when he won the Open. You look at pictures; it's very, very different. Has he lost speed? Is he the same? Is it that these are things that I wonder, right? Because like I think with Cam, the 2 years preceding the Open win, which at that point I think he was very much on a trajectory to get to number 1 in the world before he went to live. The improvement of the tee to green game was astounding. And there was substantial speed, which helped him get to the short irons, which the short irons and wedge play. I don't know if I would if coming down the stretch, I don't know if there's anybody in the world I have more confidence with a short iron in their hand.
I don't think so.
But if you even lose a fraction of that speed, it has such a big impact down through the bag. Because if it's one extra club into every green, it might seem like such an inconsequential number, but like this, the difference between ultra elite male professional golfers and above average is fractional stuff.
Totally. And if it could be the difference between having an 8-footer for birdie and an 11-footer for birdie, and he's such a good putter that he's burying a lot of those 8-footers. So I think a huge part of the Cam Smith ascension was, picking up that speed, which gives him more short irons and those putts that you can convert. So was just pulling some stats. I don't want to bore people with stats, but was just pulling together some. I kind of set the range from 2010 onward, but Andy, players who have played at least 5 events since 2010 and made the cut in all of them, Cam Smith is one of those players. 7 of 7 made cuts here, and he has 4 top 10s in that span. Rahm has also made all of those cuts, 7 of 7, and another player that we're going to see, Adam Scott, 14 of 14 made cuts. I think it's pretty impressive since 2010, 14 of 14. He's the only golfer that's made all the cuts in that span who's played at least 10 events. So those are a couple names to be thinking about, not just them potentially doing well at Augusta, but why do those golfers do well at Augusta, and what might that reflect about skill sets of other players who could do well?
Are there any newcomers that you're particularly interested and excited to watch play the Masters?
Well, I think Wyndham Clark might be the most exciting name. I'm really excited to see what Wyndham Clark can do at Augusta. I mean, he's not a newcomer. I don't know if you.
I feel like he's a newcomer in the sense of he really started to put it together last May,
and he's never played Augusta.
He hasn't.
No, I mean he wasn't in Augusta last year.
That's insane.
It's
so
crazy.
You got two players that are in the top 11 in the world rankings that are going to be playing their first Masters.
It's crazy. I know, because that was the story with Wyndham Clark. He won the U.S. Open and he hadn't even been qualified for the Masters.
I forgot about that.
I'm pretty excited to see what he can do. And you're kind of alluding to Ludwig Aubert. What are your expectations for him? How excited are you to watch him for the first time at Augusta?
I'm super excited. I think this is just, I think it's a golf course that's hard to get comfortable on. And the number one thing that is required for success at Augusta is being comfortable. It's about being able to free yourself and really commit to targets, make swings, and not be worried about where it could go or what might happen. Because the only thing worse than hitting a bad shot is worrying about hitting a bad shot out there. Because that's going to lead to one. So I think that's probably why first-timers struggle at Augusta, is just not being comfortable enough to let it go. That being said, I think he's been a super impressive talent. I think his game presents itself pretty well. I think we saw in the Ryder Cup, his approach play was a little leaky, and that's a super small sample size. But the way he played there under similar, I think, pressure, similar uncomfortable situation, that's what would make me hesitant about Ludwig.
I think it's one of the most interesting stories in golf is like, what does Ludwig's long iron play look like? Because you just don't see it that often on the PGA Tour. He kind of cleaned up late summer and through the fall, but that's not a lot of long irons. You're right. Marco Simone struggled a little bit with the long irons, and then Genesis, he was fine. I mean, he's shown he can hit a long iron. Like, the guy's an amazing ball striker, but what's he going to do at Augusta is a great question. Can I give you another, not a first timer, but
last year a player told me that had played with Ludwig when I was asking them about him. He said he's no Rahm.
In what way? The long iron?
Just like that was the general thought. And I think they've been on a similar trajectory in terms of their play early in their career. But it was illuminating to me that was the comment. He's really good, but he's no Rahm. And maybe that I don't know. That was obviously before he went on a crazy run that he's gone on, but I thought that was illuminating.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a big opportunity to find out a little bit what Ludwig's game is. So that's probably one of the most compelling names to keep an eye on. His debut at Augusta. Golfers have done well in their debuts at Augusta. It's not impossible, and that's one name I was going to throw at you, Andy, that I think isn't a long shot, but he's not on the first sheet of names. I think Sahith is a super interesting name this year. He made his debut at Augusta last year and finished ninth, solo ninth.
Played well at the old course.
He's a good ball striker. He's got the power off of the tee and some of the long iron play. The short
there's
game,
enough. There's a little bit more space too, which I think he can get a little bit wild, and that space
a little bit. Yep,
it helps him out. He's got a lot of shots. He knows how to hit golf shots. I think that's like this sounds simplistic, but the guy's got a lot in his bag.
He does. And even some of, like, I know Phoenix isn't necessarily the best comparison, but it has some similarities to Augusta, especially controlling those approach shots into kind of big, firm greens. Finished fifth Phoenix this year, and he almost won, as we remember previously. So I think Sahith's kind of an interesting name to keep an eye on. Andy, do you have anybody that wouldn't be on the first sheet of names that you think is either going to play well or you're just excited to see how he stands up?
I mean, I'm excited to see Niemann play, and obviously he's played so well. This has been a controversial topic in golf with him, the exemption he got, the live thing, but I got to commend him for playing all over the world and attempt to get this and get it. He's played well there in the past. He's one of the people that like is one of the people that I miss more that went to live. Like I would say Cam Smith, him, Brooks. And I mean, he's only 25 years old. It's crazy. I mean, this is the thing when you turn pro at 18. He's a household name, but he's still only 25. So there's, a extreme, just familiarity, and this is when guys, and I think I like him being from Chile. I guess he's someone that I'm excited to see. Just in general, Minwoo Lee could be fun to watch out there. Who will be in there? I think he's shown up in some big moments. He's had some flashes. Again, like I think Minwoo's older than Neiman, just as a reference point, right? Everybody thinks about Minwoo as this like young star, and I think he's older than Neiman, if I'm correct.
He is older than Neiman just by a few months, but
yeah.
I love the Neiman call, Andy. I think one thing we've seen some guys who do well at Riviera show up and do well at Augusta, right? Adam Scott, Bubba Watson, a lot of similarities there, sort of, and the long iron test, the complex greens. Neiman won by multiple shots at Riviera in 2022. I think he might be the name that if he showed up at the top of the leaderboard on Thursday at this year's Masters, it would sneak up on some people, but it really shouldn't. Like he's somewhere around 50-1 on depending on what book you're looking at. And I think him having longer odds than like a Finau, as much as I like Finau, I think Neiman's got a better chance of winning this golf tournament than Tony Finau.
I guess like something that I'm just fascinated to watch is Justin Thomas. Just in general, he's played okay there. I think he had a real shot to win in 2020. He hasn't played great. He played really well at some soft setups. Once we ratcheted it up here in the last few weeks, he hasn't played as well. So, listen, like, I think this is hard. Is JT's best golf behind him? And I think this year's majors, he's 30 years old.
It's a big question.
You look at superstar players, and Justin Thomas is a superstar. In golf, usually superstars are like 5 years, 7 years, 10 years of really high level play. We're at like they're really special superstars get to 10 years of high level play. For JT, we're at about 7 years of really high level play. I don't think this is a crazy question to ask. I think the same thing could be said about Jordan Spieth. I think Rory's the outlier of this generation where his high level of play has surpassed 10 years. I mean, anybody that disagrees with this, go find me how many superstars had more than 10 years of extremely elite play in the history of modern professional golf. The list is super short. I mean, Faldo's cliff is like 10 years, and that guy won 6 majors. Duval was really short. Vijay Singh had a really strong 10 years. Ernie Els was about 10 to 12 years. I mean, you're talking about generational players right there. It is extremely hard to play this game at a top 10, top 15 level for a really long time. And Rory might be, I think Rahm is poised to do it just because of how repeatable his swing is, how sound his game is, but it's very hard to do this. And if this year's majors aren't great for JT, I think it really opens up a question, because young talent, he's not long anymore. And we saw this happen with Ricky. Ricky's game started to fall off when he went from being an above average player off the tee to an average player with youth speed. And the same thing is happening now. These young players are so fast and long that what it does is it takes above average skills and makes them average skills off the tee. The only player that seemingly like really kept up and continued to be a speed king is Rory. Like, it's really hard to do.
I love this call. I mean, JT still has some speed. Like, he's still gaining distance on the field, but he's not going to be right near the top. And his
not when he was like a top 20 guy off the tee.
And some of winning is getting yourself in the mix a lot. He hasn't really gotten himself in the mix at Augusta like he should. I mean, he's been there before, but we're not looking at a ton of amazing finishes from JT at Augusta. He was cut last year, 8th the year before, 21st the year before. There's a lot in that 10 to 25 range. I think a big thing with Justin Thomas to watch is his tee shots on the 13th hole. I know I've called this out before, but he's not somebody. He likes to get really funky with this like whip draw off of that tee. I don't like the shot with the driver, and he's cost himself a lot of strokes on that hole. So that is a big one to watch.
My question is, I don't think he would ever try and hit that shot if he hadn't have gotten that great bounce on this 18th hole at TPC Sawgrass. It was one of the great bounces in golf history. I mean, that ball was snapping and managed to bounce straight because it caught like that little slope. If that ball ends up in the water there, he probably never hits that shot again.
And that's a big thing.
That's the way golf works.
I hear you. And guys trying to hit the big draw with driver, it's just with the modern technology, it's not really something that is advised. I think the 10th hole at Augusta is another example where if JT tries to do that with driver, I'd hold your breath. 10 and 13, those are big shots to watch.
Yeah, I agree. That's where distance is an advantage. That's where, could Rory get around the corner on 13 with a 3-wood and turn it over? Probably, right?
One maybe last question for you, Andy. Patrick Cantlay and Xander Schauffele, both in contention at Riviera. Pretty weak performances on Sunday. Are you giving either golfer a chance of winning this Masters?
Yeah, I've given them a chance. They're two of the best players in the world. I'm always the thing that's really drawn my attention the last couple of years with them is they are marching up the top 10s or top 10 weeks in the top 10 of the OWGR without a major. They are unassailably both. I doubt both of them will win one this year, but one of them at the end of this year, assuming they both don't win one, or both of them will be the top modern player, uncompetitive. The only people ahead of him will be Westy and Colin Montgomery for weeks in the top 10 without a major.
Pretty crazy. Unbelievably consistent. Not a lot of looks at winning a major.
Xander had a ton early.
2019 for sure. Yeah, he's had some looks.
But it's almost, I don't know. This again, this goes to this career, understanding the career of a superstar. They aren't long. And you could ask the same thing about Cantlay and Xander are we getting to the end of their maybe 5 to 7 year run as a top player? I don't necessarily think so. But there is a shelf life on players, and understanding that history says this is important when you're considering these players.
So Jake Knapp's not going to be a star that at age 30 that just won for the first time?
He could. I think one of the things that has happened with the tour is like we've become so fascinated with the prodigy that we've lost sight of like the normal career progression. And I think Wyndham Clark is a great reminder of that, where Wyndham Clark's run as a star might be starting now. And we might look back 7 years ago and be like, he didn't figure it out till he was 28.
Pretty crazy that Wyndham Clark could. I mean, we talked about a lot of golfers, and you've talked about this, just not getting it done recently. Andy, Wyndham Clark has won. He's won Wells Fargo, U.S. Open, at Pebble, shortened event. Like, he's actually starting to win. It'd be pretty impressive if he gets himself in the mix at the Masters and shoots up the world rankings. I know the world rankings are a little distorted right now, not ranking live guys, but Wyndham's got a real shot at becoming the number one golfer in the world, which is a pretty crazy climb. And
a real takeaway from Riviera, he's got serious horsepower. He's one of the few players that I've ever seen keep up with Rory McIlroy off the tee.
Guy bombs it.
So I think that you talk about this modern game of golf, that is always going to be an extremely important thing. And he putts well, and he can be a good iron player in spurts. So